La dichiarazione di guerra è già stata consegnata agli ambasciatori di Gran Bretagna e di Francia.
Americans are asking, how will we fight and win this war? We will direct every resource at our command, every means of diplomacy, every tool of intelligence, every instrument of law enforcement, every financial influence, and every necessary weapon of war, to the disruption and to the defeat of the global terror network. We will starve terrorists of funding, turn them one against another, drive them from place to place, until there is no refuge or no rest. And we will pursue nations that provide aid or safe haven to terrorism. Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
If the army is attacked in any area where the resistance has a presence or a say, the resistance will not stand by idly. We will cut off the Israeli hand that reaches out to attack the Lebanese army.
Does savagery warrant more savagery? Is the concept of an eye for an eye worthy of being a guiding principle for nationhood and society? These are questions that I ponder a lot as someone who regularly studies world history. I'm not trying to sound super deep and introspective or anything. I mention this because when you study history, you hear and read about a lot of messed up shit. It's easy to frame history in the lens of good and evil, aggressor versus the victim. While there are a lot of conflicts where the line distinguishing the aggressors and the victims is pretty blurry, there are other conflicts in the world where the line is pretty clear-cut. Even then, does being the victim of clear aggression give you a green light to return the favor? Are you morally justified in doing unto others the bad things that were done unto you? To use some modern examples, people with staunch anti-American views will say that the United States deserved 9/11 for its foreign policy decisions in the Middle East in the prior decades. On the flip side, American nationalists tend to believe Iraq and Afghanistan deserve to be invaded and decimated because of the actions of the Middle Eastern perpetrators of 9/11. Now, leaving aside that these are both heinous and insensitive positions to hold in any case, both of those views signify a strong belief in an eye for an eye principle, even in our modern world. In an era where, because of our advanced technology and connectivity to one another, we think we're more advanced than our predecessors, in reality, our thinking in regards to nationhood and society has not progressed all that much. Back to our example. Whether you agree with the fascist Taliban and Ba'athist regimes in Afghanistan and Iraq, or with George Bush's nationalistic warmongering administration, my answer for who's right in this question of who deserved what is nobody. Nobody's correct. The cold, hard truth of the matter is that savagery answered with savagery solves nothing. The saying of an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind is very cliche, but it also rings true. When you base your nationhood on the values of attack and retaliation, there is no longer a good side. There are only victims, only death. Now that's a heavy start to a discussion about two video games, but these two games, the Red Dead Redemption series and the recently released Ghost of Tsushima, heavily entrench themselves in this nearly impossible to answer dilemma while constructing their campaigns. Now both these games initially can't seem any more different. One is in the late 1800s and early 1900s Western America, the other in 13th century Japan. One is cowboys, one is samurai, one is in the Wild West, the other is in pre-modern medieval East Asia. However, the characters in both series face something very similar. They bear the brunt of a Goliath of a nation, are face to face with empires of unfathomable size and scale. Characters in Red Dead live in the American West, relatively recently settled by the US, a lot of it sees through war and displacement. The characters in Ghost of Tsushima live on one of the farthest frontiers of Mongol conquest, on Tsushima Island in Japan. Although the United States and the Mongol Empire have differences aplenty, with over 400 years between their creation, in totally different parts of the world map even, both games place you on the clearly disadvantaged side of imperial aggression. This is not to say that America and the Mongolian Empire were distinctly evil. There are seldom any empires in world history that grew entirely peacefully. Even civilizations that historians praise for how advanced they were, like the Persian Empire, the Incan Empire, had to march on other lands, kill and displace to get the territories they did. That just goes to show that no political or military entity can expect to grow without crimes on their conscience. Red Dead Redemption places you in the company of American outlaws, disenchanted with the system. From urban and rural poor, trying to earn money they believe they deserve, women who are not afforded equal rights in the American experience, and ethnic minorities who are in the direct crosshairs of American racial aggression, led by the nonconformist Dutch Vanderland. The majority of these people are those that America either hurt or left behind in its pursuit of manifest destiny. In Ghost of Tsushima, Japan was one of the final frontiers of the domineering Mongol Empire in East Asia, after successfully conquering China and Korea, while westward, Mongol hegemony extended to the Middle East and the Balkans. As we know, the Mongols marched forward with notable brutality, willing to burn and pillage as much as necessary to acquire the submission of other nations, and therefore their loot, pastoral grasslands, and trade routes. Jin Sakai and his allies gained along the way are Japan's first line of defense, with a myriad of clans on Tsushima Island loosely united by the Kamakura shogunate. After refusing to surrender to the Mongols, Tsushima Island suffers destruction on an unprecedented scale. Villages are razed, soldiers and civilians alike are slaughtered mercilessly. And it's weird to compare a guy like Dutch and Jin Sakai. Sakai is a lot more level-headed and mentally stable than Dutch, but both men came to the same conclusion that they had to play the game of the aggressor. Dutch, with his growing paranoia that the government was closing in on him, resorted to more desperate tactics in response, going on sprees of wanton murder and robbing. Jin Sakai grew desperate in the face of a string of defeats to the Mongolian war machine, resorting to sabotage, poisoning, and a brutality reciprocated back to the Mongol army. Both men think their actions are justified in order to defeat their larger oppressors. Both men and their followers were quite obviously pinned down, and were leading bands of people that had suffered the worst that their adversaries had to offer. They had moral justifications for their actions, but the protestations of Arthur Morgan, John Marston, and Lord Shimura all point to the contrary viewpoint.
Show a criminal's grasp of sophistry, sir. I did no such thing.
You kill. I kill. You rob. I rob. Only difference I can see is I choose whom I kill and rob, and you destroy everything in your path.
Morgan and Marston knew that Dutch's retaliations towards American society were becoming less and less justifiable. That American aggression does not justify stealing from people or acts of murder against those they disagree with. Despite Dutch's idealism and flowery language, he was answering wrongs with more wrong, which is what made so many in the gang disenchanted by him.
Is this how you want to be remembered?
He defended us!
By spreading fear and chaos!
We are at war.
And you are acting like the enemy.
Lord Shimura in Ghost of Tsushima understands that Sakai's tactics might be succeeding in pushing back the Mongols, but he also sees that Sakai is killing in a way against the samurai code that him and other elites hold so dearly, and setting a bad example for the entire island by disobeying his superiors, using poison, trickery, and brutality in the same vein the Mongols do. This clearly does not bode well for the future of the island. When its hero is someone who resorted to horrifying tactics to push back an enemy, it sets an ominous precedent for the future of conflict on Tsushima. Now, neither game really provides any definitive alternatives to this destructive path. It is clear that self-defense was necessary, and it would be wrong to condemn these people to suffer in silence. But how much can you do before you end up crossing the line and becoming the monster you hated? Leaving aside any obvious cheesy Batman references, how much can you do before you become another version of your adversary? Crossing that line from resistance to imitation perpetuates a cycle of violence, of attack, retaliation, and misunderstanding. I think the biggest thing these two games have to say is that the nature of conflict is delicate. Lines between good and evil, justified and unjustified, can become blurred very easily. In both games, there are no clear binaries in war. When characters in this game answer savagery with savagery, there are no clear-cut heroes. Only victims, only death. Thank you for watching.